Welcome to Check This Out, podcast for kids.
And they're grown-ups, where we explore people, places, ponderings, and past moments from history that shape the world around us. My name is Amy Contreras.
And I'm Cece.
Hi, listeners. We are back with another episode of Check This Out, podcast for kids. And in today's episode, we are going to get into another pondering.
A pondering is like wondering about something.
Yeah, Cece, you're right. Today's pondering is...
What was the bubonic plague?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to be honest with you. I was a little obsessed with the bubonic plague when I was younger and learned about it in school. It's so scary and interesting and gross all at the same time.
Well, now I am excited to learn about the bubonic plague.
Well, the bubonic plague goes by another name too.
That's right. It also called the Black Death.
What a creepy name, but fitting. The Black Death, or the bubonic plague, was a horrible global epidemic that happened in Europe and Asia in the mid-1300s.
Mama, what's an epidemic?
Great question, Cece. An epidemic is a sudden, fast spread of a disease in a specific community or region.
The plague arrived in Europe in October of 1347.
12 ships from the Black Sea docked at the port of Messina. People gathered on the docks to greet the ships, but they were met with a terrible surprise. Many sailors on the ships were dead, but not all of them.
What happened to the ones who were still alive?
The still alive sailors were super sick, and their bodies were covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus.
Ew, that's gross. So would you either rather to be dead or be covered in black oil?
Honestly, it's a valid question, Cece, and I'll get into what the bubonic plague was in a minute. But these black boils were one of the signature symptoms of the plague. And after people discovered the ships full of dead and sick men covered in boils, authorities tried to order the fleet of what were called the death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death would kill around 20 to 25 million people in Europe.
What percent of Europe population was killed by the Black Death? A, 1/8, B, 1/4, C, 1/3, or D, half.
If you said C, you're right. The Black Death killed about 1/3 of the continent's population in Europe, although some estimates say much higher.
How did the Black Death start, Mama?
What a great pondering, Cece. There are lots of things to ponder about the Black Death. The plague came to Europe from Asia, probably from the trade routes known as the Silk Road over land, but we also know it came from trade ships over the sea as well. Asia had been dealing with the bubonic plague since 1322, before it started to spread along the trade routes.
What were the symptoms of the bubonic plague?
Great question, Cece. First, let's explain what symptoms are. Symptoms are like clues your body sends you when it's not feeling its best, like a tummy ache or feeling hot like a fever or a runny nose. And then when we tell a grown-up or a doctor these clues, it helps them figure out how to make us feel better. Common symptoms of the bubonic plague were the appearance of painful buboes.
Oh, I get it. That is why it is called the name bubonic plague.
Yes, these buboes showed up in your neck, in your armpits, and other parts of the body. When they appeared, they would appear black and they would ooze pus and blood, and it hurt a lot. These buboes were also followed by a fever and even vomiting blood.
What?
Yeah, it was a hard disease. People who got sick with the Black Death usually died between 2 and 7 days after being infected. And the death rate was super high. Between 60 to 90% of people who got the Black Death died.
That must have been really hard. Wait, because you said mostly people died, but can something else keep them alive or something?
Well, we're going to talk about the medicine back when this happened. And unfortunately, there wasn't really a lot of medicine to help the people who got sick. And the plague affected everyone. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor or old or young, man or woman. The Black Death was really scary for pretty much everyone in society. And the plague had 3 different strains or types, and each one of them had different symptoms. So the one that we've been talking about the most, the bubonic plague, this was the disease with those symptoms like the black buboes that oozed the pus and the blood, and these symptoms damaged your skin, and that's why you got all covered in the dark blotches.
Most people who got the bubonic plague died in about a week.
Now, there was a second strain, and that was the pneumonic plague. And this was a type of airborne sickness, and it attacked your lungs before it went to other parts of your body. So this is part of why it was so deadly during the Black Death. And there was the septicemic plague, where you got sick because of your blood. And the septicemic plague caused dangerous bleeding in your body, which pretty much was almost always deadly. This was the deadliest form of the plague in medieval times.
Oh my goodness, that is terrifying.
It was. And keep in mind, Cece, like your earlier question, when the Black Death was happening, this was during medieval times. And people didn't understand a lot about medicine or about how diseases spread. It took a long time before scientists figured out what happened or how the disease spread.
But we know now.
Yes. In 1898, a man named Paul Louis Simond figured out that the disease was spread by an animal. Do you want to guess which one? Do you think it was A, birds, B, fleas, C, bats, or D, dogs? If you guessed B, fleas, you're right. The bubonic plague was spread by fleas. When fleas would bite an animal or a person that was infected, and then they bit someone that wasn't infected, the disease spread through those flea bites.
The fleas that spread the diseases traveled around on ships on black rats that carried the fleas.
These rats played a big role in spreading the bubonic plague. They were known as house rats or ship rats. Black rats like to live close to humans. When the rats died, the fleas moved on to human hosts that they would bite.
The fleas also lived in human clothing and could be carried to other locations in that way.
The plague came back several times after it first came to Europe. The Black Death returned in 1361 to 1363, 1369 to 1371, 1374 to 1375, 1390, and again in 1400.
They just couldn't get away from it.
Yeah, and they didn't know what caused it, so it was really hard to stop. Today, this type of epidemic is terrifying, but now we understand the science of how it happens. In the middle of the 14th century, there seemed to be no rational explanation for it.
Doctors didn't even know what to do.
Yeah, you're right, Cece. During the Black Death, doctors wore a mask and special clothes that they hoped would protect them from the plague. The costume kind of looked like a bird. The doctor mask had openings for the eyes and straps that held a beak in front of the doctor's nose. Doctors thought if there were bad smells, they could remove them, and they thought this would prevent the disease. They also thought that maybe herbs could remove the smell of evil and keep people from getting infected with the plague.
A wooden cane was used to point out problems and examine patients without disturbing them.
This cane that the doctors used was also used to keep people away and remove clothing from plague victims without having to touch them. When we think about the first period of the Black Death, from 1347 to 1352, a lot happened during this time. The plague affected a lot of parts of life in medieval Europe. Before the plague, the kings in the countries across Europe were thought to own all the land, and then he would share this land with his nobles. The nobles, in turn, had something called serfs work the land, which turned a profit for the lord, who gave some of that money back to the king.
Mama, what's a serf?
A serf was basically a slave in medieval Europe. The serfs earned nothing for their labors working the fields for the lords and the king, but they did get lodging and the food that they grew themselves. Since all the land was the king's, he gave it out as gifts to his friends, the nobles, and his relatives. So every available piece of land by 1347 was being worked by serfs under one of these lords and the kings. At the time that the Black Death happened, Europe was really overpopulated. There were a lot of people. So before the Black Death, there was no shortage of people or serfs to work the land.
The serfs had no choice but to continue their labor for their whole lives.
There was no upward mobility in the feudal system, and a serf was tied to the land that he and his family had worked from generation to generation. So after the Black Death, there were way less workers because of all the people who died. Because there were so many less people, the roles of the people who were working the fields became way more important. The nobles couldn't feed themselves or pay the king without people to work their land, so the serfs were able to negotiate better pay and a better life.
So there was some positive impact.
In a way, yeah. The plague made the system of serfdom, or those people who were working as slaves, fall apart. And then there was more land, food, and money to go around. Another outcome was that women gained property rights. Now, laws varied across Europe, but in some parts of England, women who had lost their husbands to the Black Death could keep their land for a certain period until they remarried, or remarried and still keep the property.
It made the world change quite a lot.
Yeah. Europe and people living in medieval Europe were so unprepared for an epidemic like the Black Death. It also caused people for the first time to question authority, places like the church or the king or doctors or these systems of authority that had always seemed to have all the knowledge.
Unfortunately, this also led lots of anger.
Yeah, because people didn't know what was causing the bubonic plague. Some people placed blame on whole religions or groups of people, which was not fair. Unfortunately, throughout history, when scary things happen, people sometimes point fingers or try to place blame on others for things they don't understand.
How did the Black Death end?
Well, remember, Cece, after the initial big burst of the Black Death in 1347, it came back a few more times.
Check this out.
Officials in the port city of Ragusa were able to slow the spread of the bubonic plague when it came back by keeping arriving sailors in isolation until it was clear that they weren't carrying the disease. Back in the 1300s, they used social distancing that relied on isolation to slow down the spread of the disease.
The sailors were held on their ship for 30 days.
Could you imagine? That sounds really boring. And the 30-day time period was known as a Trentino. This period later got increased to 40 days, or a quarantine.
That's where we get the word quarantine from.
Yup, it's still a practice used today to fight the spread of disease. The bubonic plague mostly came to an end at the end of the 1300s, but interestingly enough, it reappears every few generations. Today, luckily, antibiotics are available to treat the bubonic plague, according to the World Health Organization. And there are still anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 cases of the plague every year.
Check this out.
Did you know that many scholars think the nursery rhyme Ring Around the Rosie was written about the symptoms of the Black Death?
Oh, how funny.
The Black Death and the plagues that caused so much death in the 1300s was a scary time, especially for the people who were living in it. But good did come out of it, like we talked about. In fact, the attempts to find the cures for the plague started the momentum toward the development of the scientific method and the changes in thinking that ultimately led to the Renaissance.
We learned a lot today.
Should we recap with a poem?
Let's do it!
In 1347, the Black Death came upon a ship. With sailors and sickness, a terrible trip. From Asia to Europe, it traveled with care. On ships, fleas, and rats, it brought much despair. Black boils appeared, a sight so grim. 1/3 of Europe faced death's whim. 25 million of the people in Europe would go. The towns became silent, a somber shadow. But from the sorrow change did arise. Serfs found their voice and began to be wise. Women gained rights as the world shifted fast. Lessons from darkness, knowledge amassed. Doctors in bird masks with canes held up high searched for the cause as the years went by. So remember this tale of the Black Death's reign, a chapter in history full of sorrow and pain. From darkness came a new path to explore. The spirit of learning opened many a door. Thanks for listening to another episode of Check This Out podcast for kids. At Check This Out, we use verified sources to build the stories you hear about. Our sources for this week's episode were Encyclopedia Britannica, History.com, the Science Museum of London, and others. Thanks so much for listening, and we can't wait to see you for another episode next week.
Thanks for listening. See you next episode. Don't forget to subscribe.